What settings should you be using for your Victron SmartShunt, especially the battery settings? Hi folks, I'm Roger from Offgrid, and in this episode I'm going to take you through in hopefully a lot of detail the settings that you should choose for your battery in your Victron SmartShunt so that you can get the most out of it. So let's kick off. I'll show the actual app on the video as well. So when you first link to the SmartShunt, this is the screen that you see. So it's showing you the total percentage state of charge and the current voltage and current, etc., etc. This is live. This screen is actually for the SmartShunt that you see over there. It's running our system here, and just for interest, we have 4 batteries linked to it. It's a 12-volt system, but because it's mobile, it goes out and comes back. We've kept it at 12 volts instead of upping the voltage, because we only go out with one of these batteries. During off-show times, we use these 4 batteries to power quite a lot, actually. Our workshop here, plus a whole lot of stuff in the big barn and all sorts of things. And we rely really heavily on our Victron SmartShunt to tell us exactly where we are in terms of state of charge, how much we've got, how much has been replenished in any one day, you know, how the solar panels are doing, etc. So let's take you through it now. So the screen that you can see here is if you like, the home screen of the SmartShunt app. Now we have it linked with a servo, so there's some stuff that we can see through the servo, but in this particular episode I'm going to take you through in detail the settings that you would choose for the battery to get the most out of it. And so let's click in. So you click on the little cog in the top right, and then you choose battery, and that takes you to all of these settings that I have in this document. Now, if you see the link below to get to this particular document, at the moment it's about, I think, 4 or 5 pages. We're going to be adding quite a lot more detail. Yeah, it's 5 pages at the moment. We're going to be adding a lot more detail. It'll probably take it to probably closer to 10 pages of real detail, lots of explanations and screen grabs and things like that, so that can help you to choose the best settings for yourself. Now, in the document, you'll see all over there's what the default is, what the range is, what the increments are, and then what setting we use for our own batteries. So you'll see it'll become self-evident as you start working through the document. Now, in the screen, as you can see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 actual parameters, 4 things that you can then do. I suppose there are 10 parameters, and then you can manually set state of charge and that sort of thing. So let's cover the 10 parameters first. Of these 10 settings that I'm going to run through initially, 3 of them are used to determine when you have reached 100% state of charge. Because the thing is, how will the shunt know when you have actually reached 100% state of charge? Let's say you've connected it for the first time. It doesn't actually know where your cells are. You're just pushing current into the batteries, the cells are accepting charge. How does the shunt know when it has actually reached 100% state of charge? And there are 3 important parameters here that we'll be running through, but just so that you know, there are 3 that work together to determine 100% state of charge. That is the charged voltage, the tail current, and the charge detection time. Those 3 work together. It would have been nice in the app if they'd actually grouped them, you know, in one place with some dividers so that you could see very clearly these 3 are what are used to determine 100% state of charge. But this is how Victron have decided to lay it out. Anyway, let's start running through from the top down. The battery capacity, it sounds really simple, but some people have asked questions around when they have more than one battery, and you know, what is the actual capacity? Well, it is actually quite simple. If you add up all of your batteries and sum up the total amp hours of capacity of all of the individual batteries, that is what you should be putting into your SmartShunt. So in this particular case, we've got 4 batteries. They're all 280 amp hours, so all 4 of them. So if you multiply 280 amp hours by 4, you get to 1120 amp hours, 1120 amp hours. So that's, as far as the shunt is concerned, it doesn't know there are 4 batteries. It just knows that there is a total of 1120 amp hours sitting there that it needs to count in and out. In our motorhome, we've got 280 amp hour batteries. Both Nigel and I use 280 amp hour batteries, and they're stock standard OPS 280s. So in our motorhomes, we would put as the battery capacity 280 amp hours. Most people will have sort of ranging from 100 amp hours to, we don't know of many people in their motorhomes that have more than, say, 2 big batteries, but there are a few people who've bought double batteries from us. So that would be 608 amp hours or 610 amp hours that they'd be able to put into the shunt settings as far as battery capacity is concerned. And to change it, all you do is you click on battery capacity, and as you can see, something pops up. You can either click on those figures and type over them. So if you just type over, that's fine, or you can use the plus and minus to change those figures. So I'm going to just go cancel because I don't want to change it. As you change each thing, it'll write the changes back to the shunt. There's no need to actually save everything. Right, battery capacity done. That's an easy one. Let's talk about charged voltage. Now I'm going to spend a little bit of time because this is where a lot of people make mistakes around their charged voltage. Now, in order for the shunt to know that the batteries have reached 100% state of charge, they need to be at quite a high state of charge. In fact, just below what your bulk voltage is for your chargers and the settings that you've used for your BMS. So let me just grab a trail around that quickly. One of the problems we see quite often with the use of smart shunts is that people have quite a disparity between the BMS settings and the charger settings. And really what you should be doing for these sort of things to work well is that you should have your BMS set to the same as your charger. So most people have 3 ways that they charge their batteries, or they receive charge from 3 sources. Your obvious one is the DC to DC or from the engine alternator, with another word for it is a battery to battery charger. The other is obviously your electric hookup, which could be, mains 230 or 110 or wherever you are, whatever it is. And then thirdly is your solar panels with your solar controller. On some of the older setups where you can't change all 3 of those, it's quite common that somebody has chosen the best setting that they can find for their solar and for their electric hookup, and usually they put in a DC to DC charger, and it's not possible to get all 3 of those to exactly the right voltage, but you should endeavor to get all 3 of your chargers, if possible, to the right voltage that you have set your BMS or your battery management system to. Now, we set our BMS to a cutoff of 3.55 volts per cell. So there are 4 cells, so that would be 14.2 volts for the pack. And so we set our chargers to 14.2. The BMS is set to 14.2, and therefore in the charged voltage on the app, as you can see here, we have set it to 14.0. You'll find that as you're charging, you're in the 13 point something for a long time because of the flat curve. And then as you get up past the upper knee, the voltage shoots up over a very short space of time to 14 and then 14.1 and 14.2. So when it's reached 14 volts for a 3-minute period and the current has dropped right down, then the system will know that you have reached 100% state of charge. One of the mistakes that people do is they have this voltage set too low. So what happens is that at a fairly early stage, the shunt thinks you have reached 100% state of charge, whereas you could be even a few hours away from reaching 100% state of charge. And that's a little bit misleading. So our recommendation, if you're running LifePO4 and you have set your BMS high cell high volt disconnect for your cells, that you set it to 14.0. 14.1 is also actually quite okay, because even though the shunt may be registering 14.1, the cells are probably still a little bit below that 13.8, 13.9 or so. So we recommend anything from 13.8, but preferably from 14 to 14.1, as a really good setting for live PF4 in a 12 volt system. Obviously double that for a 24 volt and quadruple that for a 48 volt system. That is one of the more important settings to get right, to actually get your shunt to report 100% state of charge when you actually reach 100% state of charge. And what you want in setting this particular parameter is you want your smart shunt to actually show quite accurately where you really are, and then when it finally clicks 99% and clicks over to 100% is in reality when the battery BMS kicks in and the battery is actually full. And our experimenting on our lithium iron phosphate batteries has been that 14.0 volts is a really sweet spot. You're about, I call it 2 or 3 minutes away from the battery actually cutting off charge because the BMS is its full. So that's what I would set it to, is 14.0, and that's what we do here. Discharge floor. Discharge floor is really to report the overall state of charge with a bit of a safety margin if you don't want to totally deplete your batteries. So if you really want your batteries to last as long as possible, then you won't discharge them 100% of their capacity. You'll discharge them to a certain point. So the discharge floor is really a setting to say, well, although I've got a 280 amp hour battery, I want to discount the last 10%. So, 28 amp hours I want to take out of the equation. So I'm really treating it as 250 or 252 usable amp hours. And so I'm going to set a 10% discharge floor for that. So that's what some folk will do for lithium batteries. If you are running a lead acid battery, you're going to want that discharge floor to be at least 50%. A lot of experiments recently would indicate that you want the discharge floor to be even sort of higher, so to call it 60%, at least 55%. If you're an AGM, 50% is probably quite realistic, but we're not talking about the old technology. In terms of lithium batteries, I would recommend a discharge floor of 5%, or if you are not worried about keeping some reserve, then just state it as 0%. That's quite fine. Getting to the tail current now. Tail current is important because it works with the charge voltage and the charge detection time to determine when your battery has reached 100% state of charge. So basically, in our settings here, when the battery is 14.0 volts and the charge current has dropped to below 2% of the stated capacity. So in this screen here, because we got 1120 amp hours, it's 2% of that, so it's quite a lot of amps that it still could be flowing through for at least 3 minutes. Then the system will, or the shunt will say that the battery has reached 100% state of charge. So tail current is really the only purpose it serves, is to tell the shunt when the battery has reached 100% state of charge. For lithiums, tail current of 2% is great, I think. Can't remember what the average, the default is. Let me just see. Tail current, it's 4%. Default is 4%. We've changed it down to 2% as being something more comfortable. As I said, we've fiddled with these until on a number of occasions we've actually watched, it's quite sad, sit and watch the shunt and see how many amps are coming in. And I've seen that the shunts get to 100% state of charge just as the battery is actually reached saturation and is not accepting any more charge. And tail current of 2% is what we found for lithium works really, really well. Charge detection time, as I said, the tail current and the charge voltage must have reached those figures for the stipulated time before the shunt says that's a 100% state of charge. And 3 minutes is the default, and we've kept it at 3 minutes. Right, let's talk about the Puckett exponent for a while. Basically, this is for a lead acid system, it's going to be 1.25, and for a lithium system, which is much more efficient in terms of accepting charge, your Puckett exponent is anything from 1 to 1.05. Quite a lot of folk will set it as 1 or just over 1, meaning that the battery is 100% efficient. We find that, and again, this is by a lot of experimenting and tweaking, that from our point of view, 1.05 is the most efficient. And again, here, if I look at the the defaults on the Victron side, it is 1.25. So it is actually, when you get your shunt, it is set to a lead acid default. So that's, yeah, we changed it from 1.25 to 1.05. But again, I've seen a lot of guys that have changed it to 1.00 or 1.01, roundabout there. We found 1.05 is better. If you're not sure and you got lithium, just change to 1.05. Right, the charge efficiency factor default is 95%, which is again more aligned with lead acid. They're about 90% efficient. And we have chosen 98% as being the efficiency factor. And what this does is it just changes the number of amp hours that have counted out and back in again. A lot of guys with lithium will choose a 99 or even 100% charge efficiency factor. We'd love our lithiums to be that efficient, but actually practically the SmartShunt is more accurate. We find on a number of lithium batteries, we've tested this at 98% efficiency. That's still a really high efficiency ratio, and what we find there is when the battery is counted down a whole lot of amp hours and using a variety of methods to measure how much has actually come out, different shunts and things like that. 98% efficiency is what we would like to use for the charging. So obviously you use up, you count, and then you charge out, and it's counting 98% of what it is running through the shunt is actually being stored in the battery. The rest is being lost, heat in the cables and things like that. So 98% is what we recommend there. The current threshold, basically, if you got sort of noise in the line and your battery's you're not charging or really discharging for quite a long time. So let's say you've just parked your motorhome up and it's parked up for 6 months or something like that. Your current threshold basically says that anything less, in this particular case, 0.1 amps, anything less than 0.1 amps, it doesn't count in or out the amp hours. So it just assumes there's nothing flowing in or out of the battery when the current flow is less than 0.1 amps. That is the default, 0.1, and I'd suggest to stick with it. And as I said, that's basically just to cater for sort of noise in the system that the shunt might think that there is current flowing in. But it only affects you when the battery has stood, or the vehicle has stood unused for a long time. And I'm not even sure that 6 months would cover it. I mean, you're talking about a tiny amount of current flowing in or out at 0.1 amps. So yeah, it doesn't really matter, but if you want to be pedantic, then set it to what you think, but I would recommend 0.1 amps. Right, the time to go averaging period. That's the default is, I think it's 3 minutes, and we've set to 3 minutes here. Yeah, 3 minutes. And basically that's when it's reporting how much time you have to go. That's the averaging period that it works on to calculate that. I mean, to be fair, it's just leave it at 3 minutes. It's the basic setting that is probably the best one that you would want to do. What is it going to do? You've basically got 3 options in the app. We've chosen keep the state of charge, as in whatever the state of charge was, keep that. The last bit of functionality on the screen is the zero current calibration. That is very, very seldom used, but can be used when your shunt is measuring or is detecting current flow. When you know there is no current flow, then you can set it to 0. So when you hit that, basically it's going to take whatever it thinks is actually flowing through and just say there's actually nothing flowing through. And then in future, whatever it thought was flowing through will always be ignored by that amount. Now, just use this if you are absolutely sure that there is no current flowing through there, and you can see that your shunt is reporting some current. And what you will need to do is you will need to make sure, 100% sure, that there is no current flowing through the system. And probably what you'll have to do is to take your minus terminal off, actually undo the bolt and take everything off, so that it is definitely not measuring anything. And you'll be surprised when you take this off and you thought there was nothing flowing through, that actually then you can see there is really nothing flowing through. But if you take everything off this minus terminal and it still shows that something is flowing through, then all you need to do is to click that calibrate zero current calibration, click the calibrate button, which will calibrate it back to 0, and then you can connect everything back on. You can put your lug back on here and tighten it back on here. If you've got some sort of isolator after the minus, that's even easier. You just turn the isolator off and then you can do that. But you do need to make absolutely sure that there is definitely no current flowing through. And Victron suggests, and I would agree with this, Victron suggests that it's not good enough to go and turn off everything, because even if you've forgotten like a USB charger or something like that is drawing a tiny amount of current, it's going to mess things up for you. So yeah, use this last option with care, because everything else is really neither here nor there. You can just change them and everything evens out, but changing the calibration, you could be chasing your tail afterwards. So only use that when you absolutely know without a doubt that there is no current flowing through, but this thing is reporting current. And that concludes all the battery settings. We'll be doing some of the other settings at a later stage, but I think this is probably enough detail for you to really set this up. As I said, if you look below, there's a link that takes you through to getting this document, and as I said, it'll probably land up being about 10 pages of loads of detail that you could then use as a reference point, maybe keep it in your van or something like that. I find that, like I say, we've experimented a lot on getting this thing down to a fine art, and these are the settings that I'm really pleased with for a number of our shunts. It's not just one that we've been playing with, it's quite a few. And at this stage, when on all of these systems where we've put these settings in place, when like right now it's saying 70.5% state of charge in these batteries, we know that it's actually remarkably accurate. We've double checked this using other methods, and we're very happy that it is actually correct. And it's nice looking at your Servo screen or whatever you've got, or looking on the app, looking at that and seeing and knowing that you can trust this 100%. Out there are quite a lot of bad settings and people not trusting what their shunts are reporting to them. But we found that we've got to the point where our shunts are really telling a really good, accurate figure of our state of charge. If you look down below, there's the link to our mailing list, which we'd love it if you click on that and join that list. And I think you'll find that we provide some very useful information on there. So one of the things we don't do is just spam a whole lot of stuff to sell. We usually try and make it really informative and send out emails that generate a lot of positive feedback, provide really useful information, and bring to our viewers' attention something that they may not have known before that is usually quite helpful to them. So it'd be great if you can click on that and take the journey through that, and if you didn't like it, just unsubscribe, but see how it goes. So folks, hopefully you found that useful, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.